right, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get our meeting started. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you. I'm up for the thought this evening. So it's almost officially winter. It feels like it's already winter, but I think winter officially starts on December 21st. So I was thinking, what can I share? What thoughts, what pearls of wisdom? Please pardon me while I get a little personal. I hate winter. It is my least favorite holiday by far. So when I was trying to find a quote about winter, I found some fun ones, and I found some that I think fit my personality. But here was the one I thought that was the best with me and my horrible attitude going in about winter. And that's from Anton Chekhov. And he says, "People don't notice whether it's winter or summer when they're happy." So I would encourage us all, whether winter is your season or not your season, you're not going to notice as long as you're being happy. So I would encourage us all to be happy as we go into the 2020 year, and then we'll like winter and summer and fall and spring. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So first up on our agenda, a parking modification. This is an administrative decision regarding a property located at 125 South Main Street, and I will turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Heyman and members of the commission. So this item is brought forward by Leighton and Associates. They are under contract to buy the old fire station, and they would like to request a parking modification because under the old use, I'm not even sure it had sufficient parking under the old use, but under the current ordinance, they have insufficient parking. However, the uses that they will have in this building is their CPA firm, which will run from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., as well as a boutique-style gym, which will have hours before 9 a.m. and after 5 p.m. So the parking study for these uses would require 19.05 stalls. And I have a correction on my report. They currently have 16 stalls, but they have proposed 18 stalls. So that isn't a huge change, not many in deficit, but they did propose in their application that they hope to build the business and would require at most 24 stalls at full capacity for both businesses, but once again, they would be operating at different times, so those 24 stalls would not be needed at the same time. So staff would recommend this parking modification. Do you have any questions?
Great. Thanks. Any questions for staff? If not, we'll invite the applicant to step forward and speak to this matter. Great. You'll just take either one, whichever one strikes your fancy. And if you'll just state your name for us.
Rochelle Dillingham.
And Matt Layton. So, when we first started looking at buying the building, one of the first things we became aware of was the potential for additional parking. So going through this process, we hired an engineer to kind of do the study for us, to look at the existing parking. Currently there's, I believe, was it 14 stalls?
No,
16 stalls that are already there with the fire station. We propose that we can add a few more in the east east of the building, in front of the bays of where the trucks used to be parked. There's ample room there to add a few parking stalls that would fit and would meet our needs. So any additional parking would require substantial modifications to the landscaping, which would require us to remove a significant amount of green space, which would be the grass on the south side of the building, we could fit parking there, but in speaking with our general contractor who's going to be doing the work for us with the inside, he estimated that the cost to remove everything and replace it with additional parking would be about $75,000 is his rough estimates, which would be a significant expense to us because the way that we'll be using it, those additional spaces would not be needed.
Great, thank you. I'm just curious as to what the nature of your boutique specialty gym is going to be. It sounds like it's fairly small, but just help me understand what that's going to be.
Yeah, so it's going to be like small group training. So there'll be one trainer there that will be essentially working, and then there'll be classes not to exceed 8 people at a time. So, and those classes will run starting at 5 a.m., starting every hour until 8 o'clock.
So is there going to be overlap then when people are coming and going?
No, the classes last 45 minutes.
Okay,
So they start every hour, but they last 45 minutes.
okay. Any other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, one question. It looks like on the south side of your building,
Yeah.
there's that drive aisle that comes down.
Correct.
Which looks like the third access point to your property. You have the one on Main, then the one on the street to the north,
Yeah.
and then that one as well. Maybe this is a question for you guys and staff. Is there a parallel parking option in there that you could run some cars down and add more parking in that spot?
There's not, just based upon how wide it
The
is,
width.
it wouldn't work. We've looked into that. And UDOT is actually requiring us to
Close
to
that.
build up that curb where on the west side of the building, we have to make that curb and gutter, which will be a substantial cost to us, but UDOT requires that. So the only access
Oh.
point will be that alley on the south end,
Mm-hmm.
and then from First South.
I see.
So currently that is all sloped down. That's the way they built it originally. Essentially, that whole frontage on the main street is all sloped. We're going to build all that up except for where that small alley is.
I see. Thanks.
What are you planning on doing with the existing concrete pad on the west side?
On the west side, the thought is to leave part of it there and remove the part that's closest to the road and turn that into more of a green space.
Got it. Okay, any other questions for the applicant?
Is it open for us for questions or just you guys?
No, this one has not been scheduled for a public hearing.
Protocol was.
Yeah, but good question. Any other questions from the commissioners for the applicant?
Nope.
Nope. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So this has not been scheduled for a public hearing, so it just comes back to us. Any further questions for staff?
And can you explain that? Can you explain why it's not been scheduled for a public hearing, just so the public can understand?
It's administrative.
It's an administrative decision
It's
by
an
the
ad-
commission, but you can ask
So as an
our city
administrative
attorney if you
decision-
can open it up for public comment.
Yeah, it hasn't been noticed for a public hearing.
As an
Lisa?
administrative decision, we just are checking to see if they're following all of the rules and regulations that are required in order to get this. So we, if it were a legislative decision, then we would ask for public comment as well. So just so that's clear.
I have a question. I like the idea, I like the use, I don't have any issues with it. If we do run into a parking issue in the future, say that the business is growing or they need more parking stalls, can we then at that time require them to add stalls?
And that was, I believe that was put into
Right.
the recommendation, that if there are issues down the road,
Was it in the
that
recommendation?
we would require more space. We did the study where we could fit enough parking to fit the use if we didn't have the overlapping. So we've essentially, from my understanding is that was built into the recommendation.
Yeah, that's how I read
Yeah,
paragraph 3.
the
of the
parking
recommendation.
modification
If there
is
are
for
any
specific
changes, okay.
for that
3A.
use and user.
3A, yeah, okay.
Yeah, because it talks not only about future tenants, but also future uses. So even if this existing tenant were to change their use, then that would allow us to go back in
To
and make the
re-review
correction.
it.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
That's the way I read that language.
Yeah, I don't have any other.
All right.
questions.
Any further discussion?
I think we've talked about parking modifications in the past and why we will allow certain things to happen. And part of the reasoning for this that I feel comfortable with it is they clearly show the use and the square footage and the calculation. And the sum of that calculation is just very, very close to what they currently, or what they're proposing to have. So even if they were to use the space simultaneously, they would really only be one parking stall short, which to me is very, very close. But given the fact that they are not going to be using them simultaneously, I feel like this is a good use of space. And I remember Cassie talking to us at one point about over-parked areas and how we have lots of requirements. This, not as Centerville City, but just in general, we over-park a lot so that there's lots of unused spaces when we could have them as green spaces, or we could have them, as shared parking spaces. And I think this is a creative and effective way to utilize the parking and also help us maintain as much green space as possible. And it's close enough that I feel very comfortable with it.
That's where I come down on it. We're talking about one parking spot,
Yeah.
and the alternative to getting the one extra parking spot would be to give up a lot of green space, which I think is valuable.
$75,000 for the
Yeah.
applicant, which is a significant cost.
If there's no further discussion, the chair will entertain a motion.
I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to approve the parking modification for the building located at 125 South Main Street, based on the conditions 1 through 3 in the staff report, with the reasons for the action 1 through 3 in the staff report.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? If not, we'll start with you, Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
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 All right, parking modification passes. Thank you very much.
Chair Heyman, may I address the public?
Of course.
I guess I stepped out, I didn't see it. If there's questions of what went on in the action, they feel free to contact staff and we can explain what happened.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up on our agenda, we have a conceptual site plan for Legacy Lands Lot 1. So I'll turn the time back over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Heyman. I'm just pulling up the, let's see which one. We'll just do the conceptual plan exhibits for now. At the time of the report, I have not had a discussion with the applicant. I did have a discussion prior to the meeting, so I'll brief you on that discussion after our presentation. As you should know from the report, staff already went down the road of recommending tabling. Let me give you the logic of that. I don't want to go over and highlight every little item, because then that just comes across as negative, 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 and I don't think there's a reason to come across, like something's really bad, because there are a lot of things that could be addressed and fixed and managed into the project better. So I want to come across as just a naysayer. But I do think, because I did not have a chance to talk with the applicant before, there are a few significant things that I wanted to highlight just for reasons why it's important and why it ended up being tabling, because it's unusual for staff to come to you with a tabling item. We like to try to get to the point where we can move forward. The SCP zone, or our Shorelands Commerce Park zone, is different than our industrial zone in the sense of design and layout. There are a lot of crossover uses for industrial uses. There's some limitations too, as you're aware of the equipment sales that came before you a few meetings ago. But essentially, it's an industrial warehouse type of zone. It's anticipating to be our job center into the future. There is a southern part at 1275. Let me go to the Google Earth and pull back out. That is eligible for development of our business park. But the rest of the business park is not really ripe at this moment in time. And here's our west side. If you're looking at the bridge going over Legacy Parkway, this is 1250 west. It hits this corner at 1275 north. This is the continuation of 1300. Our main thrust of the business park is this 200-acre area. And until the road cuts through and makes the connection, it's not really ripe for infrastructure and development. But south of 1275 are a couple of pieces. Here, this is the UDOT sheds in the sewer district. This is existing development that's in the public facility zone. And then you have the Pastures project, which is developed now. That's a Craig Salmon project. Then you have the Legacy Lands, which is the applicant Jeff Cook and the owners of J&L Nursery. I believe they had some previous operations here. That's the subdivision that you've seen earlier in the year, or maybe a year ago, where there's 5 lots in the subdivision. We're looking at lot 1 of the project. So there is a newness from my point of view of understanding what the Shorelands Commerce Park is particularly trying to accomplish. And so I point out the major themes that I think that we need to look at is there's a design principles that we want to make sure. So when we look at a development layout, we want to answer, are we incorporating in these design principles? So think of this as like the Parish Lane Design Guidelines. You have the site layout, but there's some additional things, performance standards that we expect. And one of those elements is, for the shorelands, is there's several principles that are expected. And those principles are to be outlined at the conceptual level in what they call a design pattern book. Design pattern book is more than the site plan. It's design principles and performance standards, and how are you meeting those expectations. And I don't think the design pattern book is quite ripe to ensure that we're implementing the standards correctly. So I bring that up. The second one is the dealing with open space, green space, landscaping, however you want to label it. I think it's open space and landscaping. It's in the ordinance. Typically, our industrial zones are west of I-15. There's no culinary water. So no culinary, that's wrong. No secondary irrigation water, only culinary water. So we reduce typically in the west side of the city. Because of that, we reduce the landscaping below. So the east side's 15%, the west side's 10%, but not in the Shorelands Commerce Park. The Shorelands Commerce Park is actually 30% open space. Now, the difference in the landscaping style is why the increase in amount is there. We're not expecting extremely formal landscaping. It's an upland environment. It's supposed to incorporate the upland environment features that are potential. So the Pastures project, you see that with their wetlands and their drainage, it's in front. That's a significant amount of open space that incorporates that development. Here we have some subdivision. There are some wetlands, but they're located elsewhere on Lot 5. So Lot 5 has a predominance element of features that would be preserved and wetlands incorporated. The other lots have much, much less. But there's still a requirement to have this shorelands environment, which is 30%. 30% landscaping is not to be necessarily formal. It is to be drought tolerant, the use of the gravels, the use of natural landscaping, anything that you can preserve. So if you look at the Pastures project across the street, they had the chance for the wetlands, and there's a significant amount of wetlands that are incorporated in the landscaping design. So I point out that their J&L Nursery is great at landscaping, so I really hesitated to make this a negative because they're good at their landscape business. But I don't quite think that we've hit what we expect in the shorelands as an upland environment. And maybe we have, maybe in their minds that they have, but if we have to increase it beyond the 13% that's provided, I'm wondering between the irrigation needs and the more drought-tolerant needs, if there's a better balance that could be achieved. So I think the landscaping is a significant issue in the design. The other significant issue is the parking. This is that office warehouse flex space. And according to the calculations, I wasn't sure in their calculations because it did a percentage ratio. Doesn't equate to the square footage ratio. I calculated a square footage ratio, and we should be short about 10.
That what they're showing is short 10?
Short 10 stalls.
10,000 square foot building?
Yeah, so we need to take that into account. Are we adjusting the landscaping? Are we adjusting the building size? And just need to make sure that the numbers that they're proposing are correct, because we don't want to miscalculate the number of stalls. And so you look at that, and then I add some issues with design about the building. The concrete tilt-up is another material, could count as another material, because the idea of material use was that you have salinity soils, a harsher environment. We want a long-lasting building. Tilt-up construction can accomplish that, but the tilt-up construction also may not lend itself to articulation of the building design. The bold gestures. I have some examples if you have some questions of what I mean by bold gestures, the way I interpret the ordinance. But I think there's a little bit more work on the articulation, the bold gestures in the design of the building. One thing I want to be careful with is the applicant did mention we don't want to mimic the pastures, and I don't think the design ordinance is saying you have to mimic what's across the street, but you still have to reinterpret the design standards and provide those bold gestures in those design elements to the building. So having said that, unless you have specific questions, I moved to the conversation before. I was uncomfortable because I had not communicated with the applicant. There was some, from my point of view, some significant layout changes pending their concerns on what they're trying to maintain as a value. Are they trying to maintain the value of the building size? Are they trying to maintain versus the parking, the landscaping? I didn't feel comfortable that I could paint you a picture that this is ripe for development. But at the same time, the applicant wants to move forward, and in the discussions with me, and I'm sure that they will repeat it to you, I think they're exploring the tilt-up design and some other concepts. I don't know how that's fleshed itself out expense-wise, because there's a difference between the block construction and the tilt-up construction, and maybe that's a venue that they would look at for their expenses. I don't think J&L Nursery is inapt from landscaping standpoint. So their view, from what I understand, is they intend to comply with the Shorelands Commerce Park. So if there's significant changes that need to be made between now and final, they have a list now of what those changes are to be and can work with staff to figure that out. So it seems that they would want you to consider allowing that possibility rather than a tabling. So I just bring that up so you can have that dialogue with them. But other than that, I really don't want to go through yay, nay, yay, nay, yay, nay, because it comes across as kind of uncaring. So I'm trying to be better during this happy winter season.
I know I can't be the only one that hates winter. Can you explain the difference to me and anyone who is listening? What's the difference between block construction and tilt-up construction?
Good question. So if you think of, go to Home Depot and just buy yourself a cinder block.
Okay.
That's a block construction. And there are other block constructions that they call split face concrete masonry unit that are decorative block. And decorative block is a type of construction that is acceptable in this zone. Also, you could facade with rock products and other products that the ordinance allows to have a solid look base to the building that have durability. Tilt-up panels, from my understanding, they're generally poured in large panels.
Flat.
Yeah, they're poured flat, reinforced, can be imprinted. If you look at Parish Creek, the black and white building that just went up, that's all tilt-up. And then it's painted or stained. If you see the patterns that they put into that building, the tilt-up's poured, and it can be made with impressions. If you go to Hogan Construction out here to the west, it's in the industrial area. You'll see the hard hat worker and the equipment ingrained into the side of the building. If you go to the Public Works salt shed, if you can see that off the Legacy Parkway. That salt shed is a tilt-up concrete, and it has the city seal imprinted into the concrete. So tilt-up is a larger product, tilt-up in panels, braced as they raise the panels, and then everything's reinforced into a solid unit for earthquake. So Tilled up's been used before in the industrial area for other materials rather than the concrete block. And the Shorelands Commerce Park has a better expected design to the building, but it says other similar materials. So the question is tilled up also acceptable if it's designed appropriately?
And you said Parish Creek just did that, and isn't that the one that's right east?
Yes, it's in the, if I go to the Google
It's
Earth,
just right there.
so the Parish Creek, see Hogan Construction sits here in our industrial high zone, and the Bluebird bus, and
Yep.
you'll see they did a tilled up.
And then back
This
here.
site is the
That's
Parish Creek. This
Parish
is
Creek.
industrial high
Yeah,
zoning, but the new building sits just right along the I-15
yeah.
corridor. Then when you cross over, you enter the Shorelands Commerce Park, and these two southern properties are the first of the Shorelands
Okay.
Commerce Park.
Thank you.
Corey, in your mind, what constitutes a bold gesture? I'm
Well,
curious.
being part of the Byway Committee years ago and creating the model ordinance that the 5 cities adopted for along the, we created a model ordinance, then they reinterpreted that model ordinance for their community. And we call ours the Shorelands Commerce Park. I was part of the team writing that, and so I looked at Parker, Colorado, because I had been there before. And this is a wildlife center, so I know it's a different kind of element than industrial. But these are kind of the concepts that we were looking at. Where's it going to go larger? So, again, we're a different climate, so I'm not trying to, in my mind, mimic the same plantings. But you can see that this is not a straight Kentucky bluegrass turfed site. You see the bold gestures with the lamps that are created in the, you can see the different stained concrete. You can see the different textures into the plaza stuff. Here's another location, and you see these bold gestures that are part of lining the parking lots and so forth. If you look at the pastures, I can pull that up if you want. The pastures use the Corten steel type structures with riprap rock into them and tied them into the bridges over their wetlands. And as part of the building architecture, that would be a bold gesture. They added the 3 stem logs with rope. You'll see it in the light, the street light that's there, and you'll see it spaced through the parking lot. That was the element of their bold gestures. And so that's what we're really looking for is what are those bold gestures that's tying the layout of the site into the building architecture. You know, obviously a lamp system like this is probably more than an industrial area. I'm not going to say I don't like it, but I'm just saying it's probably more. This is just down the street near the residential area as they turn a corner. You know, this is heavy use landscaping. I don't know if it has to be that heavy in my mind, but you can see it's not intended to be Kentucky bluegrass, and it's supposed to be drought tolerant kind of landscaping. So that's where I drew, when I was part of the team, drew the inspiration of something different for the Shorelands Commerce Park. It'll probably maybe not be as heavy landscaped because of the irrigation issues, but we do expect a more open site with some drought tolerant to match the Shorelands concept. So does that kind of answer it?
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Shorelands Commerce requires 30% open space, is that right?
Yeah, 70% impervious coverage is all that's allowed. So you got 30% open space now. Now you can do your plazas and all that is a part of it.
But it can't be parking or building.
Correct.
And I'm assuming that's why you were concerned, partly at this conceptual level, because they're only at 13% open space. They need to somehow figure out how to get to 30%, and there are already 10
Yeah,
parking spots
and you
under.
can use, I think it's 20 or 25% in that open space for your plaza and some other features too. But then I bring up other elements on the parking lot and its design and so forth. But yeah, it's 30% is the intended. So if you look at the pastures, it's largely their open space is largely the wetlands area. So if you look at let's go back to Google Earth. You can see the kind of construction site. All of this corner in the northeast, down the wetlands corridor, then south along 1300, and this is also their wetlands corridor. So the advantage of the pastures in their open space is they had features that had to be preserved. But we still have the issue when you develop a site, we don't want to fill it up totally industrial parking lot and building. We want some shoreland environment as a theme throughout the park.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll invite the applicant to step forward and speak to this matter. You'll step up to either podium and just introduce yourself for us.
Yeah, my name's Jeff Cook, and I'm here with Gary Smith, Gordon Smith. They're the owners of the property. And yeah, all of this little specifics, those things that Corey's talking about, I'm probably don't understand completely what those things mean, but what we were thinking tonight, and Corey sent me an email, and I probably misinterpreted it, but there were, you know, he was saying, well, there's things we need to address, landscaping and so forth, and so I'm thinking preliminary plan will address those here, you know, so that's kind of how I came in tonight, thinking that we'd look at those things and we'd probably get approval saying, yeah, this basically looks good, you need to address this and this and this for final. And that's what Corey and I talked about just before, you know, just before the meeting. I mean, it's obvious that we have to meet the requirements, and we pretty much have to work that out with staff in terms of, you know, what the specifics of those are. So that's just what I had mentioned to Corey, that we'd like to get approval tonight, subject to working those things out with staff, and then coming back on final and having it, you know, meet the expectations, and you know, that's what we would like to do. We understand there's some things that have to be done, that we need to work those out with staff, and then they'll be presented at, you know, corrected at final.
Do you have any thoughts with regards to the bold gestures that is required?
I don't know what bold gestures are. I mean, Corey has an idea. My thinking on bold gestures is we're probably going to have to talk to Corey and see what he thinks bold gestures are and incorporate some bold gestures into the plan. I don't know what bold gestures are, but, you know, we have to do what we have to do to, you know, to move forward. So we'll figure those out with staff, and then come with to final with some bold gestures, and then the parking and the 30%. I'm not sure. The 30% isn't all landscaping, right? It's something else too. It's Corey.
It's a combination of landscaping and some open space features that are allowed in that landscaping.
Okay, and so like open space features, like you said, you used a word I can't remember. Plaza. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what you mean by plaza. Is that cement out in front of the building? Is it?
That's the design eye that I feel comfortable giving you examples, but I think it's the issue that you still, this is your investment and costs, and what you're wanting to do is really, in the end, your decisions. I don't want to infringe on that freedom.
Which is why we'd like to move forward, solving these problems, and then coming back with these solved and staff comfortable with it, and bringing that before on final. And when we do that and we've met their conditions, I think you guys would probably be fine with it. If you weren't, then I guess we'd have to come back again. But we'd like to be able to move forward towards, you know, solving those in a productive manner. So that's why that's why we would like to see it approved, subject to resolving, you know, staff's concerns. And
Were you aware of the requirements of the parking and the 30%?
well, we thought we had met them. We've got an engineer, Intellis Engineering, used to be Argyle, and used to be
Von Hill
Hill and Argyle. And we've had them working on it, and so this was, we addressed parking and thought we had addressed that. We thought we'd addressed landscaping too, but obviously we haven't addressed it correctly. We'll have to revisit that, but you know, we had professionals we're relying on, and I think there definitely is some area for different viewpoints. It's a lot of it is interpretive, I think, or some of it is interpretive. And I mean, we haven't been trying to push anything in hard or anything. I mean, you guys have been involved in the whole process with us. Corey has too. We've met with the city a few times, and we're just trying to, you know, do something that'll be nice down there and work, and so whatever we need to address, we're going to address it. We're not going to develop 5 lots and pay $500,000 in improvement costs and then decide we're not going to come up with 10 more spaces if we need to. It's just something that's got to be, you know, just got to be addressed. As far as the tilled up goes, we've talked about the tilled up a lot in the past. We originally started thinking block, but we preferred to go tilled up, and we were encouraged to go that way by some people in the city. I mean, they didn't say you can do that, or you obviously, but the idea was our reasoning for it, and I think the reason that other people were thinking the tilled up is good is it's much better than block. Block has a much shorter lifespan. I mean, mortar and, you know, and block, it decays, it falls apart, it's gonna have a much shorter lifespan. The concrete, on the other hand, is structurally much more sound, has a much longer life, and stays looking better a lot longer. You don't have issues with grout joints and all those kinds of things. So we kind of changed that. Honestly, it costs more. It's going to cost more to do a tilled up than a block. If we wanted to save money, we'd go, you know, we could change and go to block. But, you know, Salmon's buildings are fine. They went block, and they're fine. I think they're only grand gestures. There's no grand gestures in the buildings themselves. They're rectangular, they're whatever. They've got some of the baskets with rocks and some steel and things like that. But our concrete tilled ups will be a much better building than a block building would be. So. Go for it.
I just wanted to address the landscaping, and it's really easy to put an eraser on the plants. I put the plants like 10 feet apart, and we could put them 10 or 20 feet apart very easily to reduce it. We chose drought-resistant plants for most of it. I don't like the Carl Forster grasses that everybody uses, so I did use some boxwood along the one side of the building for green in the winter, but they'd be very easy just to change that from a boxwood to a Carl Forster grass, very simple. We did put in not a drip system, they're not reliable, but we put a bubbler system in to conserve water. We're not doing any spraying, and we're going to have quite a large swell that will be a native grass with wildflowers mixed, is what we're suggesting. Not just grass like salmon's, but we would have some native wildflowers in there to give it some color in the spring and summer. So that was our plan, not doing any irrigating on that, but putting some bubblers in so we could keep the grasses looking nice and not have them turn brown in the middle of September, October, and be brown all fall and winter. I hate that. I mean, I sold them hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, but I like pretty things. But we did choose the drought-resistant Caryopteris, and I did put a few extra trees in. I'll probably have to put those out. I was just putting one of each of a couple different kinds. I'm on the tree board, so we're trying to get diversity of trees, so I put like 10 trees and 10 different varieties, so we'd have a kind of a selection for people to see, but that can be erased very, very easily. I put more than was needed in landscaping, so that can be erased out very quickly and simply.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? No? Thank you both very much. This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll take the opportunity to open a public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to step forward. Seeing no one else present, we'll close the public hearing. Any further questions for staff?
I'm a little bit confused as we have additional plantings and things that were put in that were not required, but yet we're still missing that. How are we so far off of the open space? Is there?
This is their design, so I'm just critiquing their design part. I went through the design pattern book. They provided a list of, shrubs on the landscaping, and so there are some drought-tolerant shrubs in there, but I'm not an expert on shrubs either. I'm going to have to rely on a landscape architect to give me that. But, there wasn't enough from my standpoint to ensure that we're doing the drought-tolerant expectations, particularly when we're only 13% of open space. I don't know the costs, associated with expanding a site and trying to balance the building size, the need for the parking, and that open space area expectation, and how much it's going to cost to maintain it. Because the intent is to reduce the cost of maintenance by not requiring heavy irrigation plants. We want to stay away from trees because the upland environment, it doesn't say you can't prohibit the use of trees, it just reduce the number of trees that are to be minimally used. And then if we have to add another whatever percentage it is, over 15%, I don't know what that impacts their design system. So I'm just bringing it up as a point rather than trying to be an expert on what needs to be done.
Okay. Any other questions?
That answer it, kind of?
Sort of.
I could do the passive way on the subject-object issue and
Well,
not really address it, which I may have already did.
Yeah, and that's an interesting tug because, obviously I appreciate being on the tree board and I appreciate, those that are wanting to plant trees because I fall in that same category whenever possible to, beautify our city and help our air and all kinds of things. So I'm supportive of that, but it's interesting to hear that, in this specific area, there are some suggestions that tell us less trees just because of the need to conserve water. Is that what you're saying exactly?
Yeah, it's more of the environment. The theme element is you go to an uplands and you're going to have, in the uplands, you're going to have areas that are prominently grasses and shrubs, and then riparian areas that might have some trees. So typically out in the shorelands, which the county and the property owner on the island by Steed Creek ripped all out, we get the, what's the weed tree out there?
Phragmites?
Well, the Phragmites are the weeds, but the Russian olives.
Russian olives, yeah.
That's not a great tree from an
Yeah.
environment, but you'll see that the Russian olives will follow the water,
Yeah,
like cottonwoods will follow the water.
yeah.
But the rest of the area is very low shrub, landscape, upland type environment. And most of the park, you have some wetlands, and then the rest of it's that more upland. So we don't want a lot of trees. We want the open land of the uplands on the edges of the Great Salt Lake look. Whether that was a right design decision, we'd have to go back and amend all the ordinances.
Well, and I understand the look of that. I'm wondering how does that, and I guess this is maybe a conversation for later, but I guess I'm just interested to see how that impacts, the water, like for conservation, part of the reason why is sometimes trees take more water, but in this area, there's a lot of water. So I guess I'm just interested that, maybe it's just more for look and less for actual efficiency of what's already down there.
Well, it's definitely thematic. I don't want to underscore that it's definitely thematic. But you also have there is a lot of water. So, Russian olives are going to be successful. Pine trees are going to be a failure.
Right.
So it doesn't say you can't have trees. It's just they're to be strategically used in a reduced amount than what the standard landscaping requires. And there's a significant amount of trees in this plan, and I'm just
But
saying.
that's not the issue. The issue is that we don't have enough open space.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So to me, the way I read it, it basically in the report, it just says, to me, there are two main conditions. We're short on parking due to the size of the building, and we're short on landscaping. That's kind of the two main issues that we're getting at, right?
Yes.
Due to the type of zone that we're in, which this just requires a larger amount of landscaping than a typical zone would. So I'm grateful for the in-depth review of this in here. I had to read it a couple times to try and get everything, but I like the concept. I like the idea. I just think that we need to kind of at least get a little bit closer to the requirements in that zone. I don't have a problem with it, but I do think that we need to see how we can get that site plan to get at least a lot closer to those requirements that we have. It's hard because there's a cost benefit of doing the project. If you reduce the building by, you know, how many square feet to try and get more landscaping in, is it going to become cost effective for you to build it? And so that's the hard part of that whole project, and I don't know how that falls. So I'm kind of stuck on it, to be honest. But that's what the zoning is. So, you know, it's hopefully we can get a little creative in that. And I don't know, does colored concrete along the frontage, does that count as landscaping if they were to add that? Like the plaza. I mean, if
it allows a certain, I don't remember the number off the top of my head. It's 20 or 25% of your open space can use those design elements. And even though they're hard surface, they're specifically dedicated to the design element of the open space versus the building and the parking. And so when I showed you those bold features in Parker, you can see what they're doing. They're creating bold gestures, and some of it is impervious area. So it's the issue of what's the impervious associated with, the open space or the parking in the building.
Well, and the impervious in that area might cause problems actually with the amount of water that is down there. It could cause,
well,
they'd have to kind of look at that.
I mean, impervious, like if you're doing like an impervious asphalt, it just kind of doesn't work in Utah, period.
Right.
So, I mean, I hate the idea of using colored concrete just in place of landscape.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's a poor substitute, but you know, how do you make the project very cost effective and beneficial if you're gonna have to reduce your building size so much to meet the requirements? Is that option feasible? It's hard. It's a hard thing to overcome, I guess.
It's going to be hard for anybody who puts a building there because the requirement is the 30%, you know, regardless. So I mean, that kind of is what it is. I'm still sort of hung up on what a bold gesture is. It seems like it's one of those like, know it when I see it. Maybe it gives a lot of discretion to the designers to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's tying in. So an example would be is that I point out that the specific bold gestures that are missing for sure are the entryway.
Yeah.
What are you doing with the entryway? And how does that tie into the building design? That's a gesture that you're starting to translate into what is being done. Signs are part of it. If you look at the pastures, you see on the corner, they have a sign with a two-tiered retaining system. They tied the accesses over the pipes of the wetlands. They tied in bridge features with the rock. So whether it's the best in the world is always subjective. You know, do you like the rip-rack rock and so forth? But then they tied it into the building on what come out in the entryways and tied it in. There's your bold gestures that are going on. They're doing something with the building, something with the site layout, something with the entry features and you can see that thematic tie between it all.
Okay, no, like I said, it seems very amorphous.
the lighted palm trees that we have over.
A lighted palm tree would be a
Dave's
bold
building.
gesture.
That would be
Very
a bold
bold.
gesture. I'm not going to support that one over there,
No.
but, not that I dislike the palm trees, I think that they're very distinctive, but, okay. Well, I mean, I will go out on a limb on this one and say I appreciate that the applicant is really willing to work with us and to make the adjustments. And I think that the issue really is, do we have enough here that we feel comfortable allowing them to go forward? And I think that I come down on, I think that if they work with staff and come back to us again, I think that we'll most likely be there. We'll fill that gap a little bit. But I think in my mind, I think we're just a little too far off yet.
I agree. I think this is going to be a great project, and I'm excited, and I think that they have a lot of great ideas, especially with, doing different plantings and trying to make it work. However, I don't remember, I can't think of a proposal before us that that has had this many things that we really need, that are important, that we need to discuss and fix, that we've recommended approval for. So I would feel a little bit nervous moving forward without just a little bit more information.
I disagree. I feel like at the preliminary stage, it's a great place to give feedback, even aggressive feedback. When I did my calculations, I thought these guys are short a lot on the landscaping. In fact, when I ran the numbers and looked at the footprints, they're short almost half the size of the building's footprint that needs to be landscaping. I calculated about 6,000 square feet short that they needed to come up to get to the 30%. That's a kicker, and that kills parking too. As they add landscaping, that kills parking. And Thomas, don't we use 250 square feet per stall?
Well, it depends on the use,
But almost 23 parking cells would be eaten up. So there's a big puzzle to be solved.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big puzzle to be solved, but I'm comfortable letting them move on. I'm comfortable
But don't
giving
you
the
think
feedback.
that would be addressed if they addressed how big the actual building is, like Tom's saying?
Yeah.
That would alleviate some of the parking needs, and it would also allow for more open space.
Yeah, I think, I don't see a way this puzzle gets solved without significantly shrinking the building.
Yeah.
There's just no way. You got to eliminate square footage of the building because that alleviates your parking and all kinds of stuff. But as far as the procedural element, I'm okay crafting fun little motions that have our own findings and stuff like that and letting them move forward. The risk is on them. They have to go through final. They're going to have to solve it, and they're going to have to give more detail at the next level. And so the risk's on them, and it sounds like their eyes wide open. I'm comfortable giving a preliminary approval, which always is deficient, with feedback even significant, to allow the applicant the option to move forward.
Wouldn't they be doing the same thing?
Timing, they just lose a month and a half, especially in December.
If you were to make a proposal, what would your motion be? To allow them to advance subject to them addressing and resolving all of the items highlighted in yellow in the staff report?
Yeah, or even simpler, that they have to comply with the zone, and we could call out specifically, look at the staff report. I would want to highlight in the motion landscaping at 30% and just nail down the parking ratio, because those are the two screws that are really driving it.
And then consult the staff report, because the staff report doesn't have solutions, so you wouldn't want to tie it to, that's more advisory, addressing the matters that are found in the staff report.
Yeah, and this is a conceptual site plan, right?
Correct.
And Lisa, remind me what happens next? Conceptual, then?
Final.
Final.
So, I agree, Becky, that I don't know if the engineer totally missed the shorelands commerce part of it. He just looked at like an industrial zone, because it's like, he is woefully short on landscaping space. But I think it's clear to the applicant what they need to do, and I don't see a way out of it without shrinking the building, and that's their call. But I'm totally comfortable giving them conceptual approval to allow the process.
So my question is on that, if we were to do conceptual approval, isn't it understood that when we approve something at conceptual, I mean, what's the amount of change that can happen from conceptual to final that is kind of,
I mean, they could change everything, right? If I had a conceptual approval, you could
and then
change,
change everything.
as long as I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Corey?
Well, the finding, if you'll read the ordinance, says that it's basically, what's the, I wrote the opposite in the finding of the staff report. Let's pull up the staff report.
Has not clearly shown how the property may be developed with regards to development
Yeah,
standards.
so
and
now you're
design
looking at,
guidelines.
is it clearly shown how it could be developed? And, I agree that conceptual isn't, you don't want to turn conceptual into that it's answered crossed every T, dotted every I, because that's an expenditure beyond conceptual.
Right.
But you have to have reasonable faith that what they're doing will work itself out. So there's two ways to interpret it. You could look at this and say, yeah, it's a significant change, and I'm uncomfortable with it. And I think you would be absolutely justified in making that finding. I did, so I don't want to fight myself on it. But at the same time, I don't really think that the configuration of the lot and its size, because this is where, how do I explain it? You're supposed to design, you don't design your lot around your buildings. You design your buildings around the lot you choose to buy. So it's like a house. It's got its setbacks, and you might want a bigger house than the setbacks, and that's your choice, but you have to find a different lot in order to do that. So I look at this. You're probably not going to see significant change in the sense of layout.
Use.
It's pretty fixed. The building's going to be somewhere around here, and the parking is going to be somewhere around here. But I do think the counter argument is there has to be some concessions in order to get the landscaping and the parking. Are those concessions building uses? Are they concessions on how they design the back lot area to the west? Is it a concession on the uses of the building? I mean, there's things that they have to look at, but it's going to be somewhat like this. So the answer is there's an aggressive list of things that have to be addressed. If you're not comfortable with that, you'd rather see something beforehand, move that direction. But, you're supposed to comply with your conceptual site plan. You're supposed to not come in with a fast food chain when you proposed office warehouse. So.
I remember in previous times, correct me if I'm wrong, that we've seen either a conceptual and a final at the same time, or some.
No, you used to in the old days,
Squashed it.
but it was taken out. Conceptual is definitively different than final, and not run
I
conjunction.
remember seeing that we would see it, and then they would then be the next applicant in line and then give us final. So now we can't do that.
Correct. That was probably
Not at
about.
the same meeting.
Not at the same
Not
Not
at
in
meeting.
the same meeting.
I guess, Logan, I'm somewhat sympathetic to your argument, except conceptual site plan has to mean something. I mean, anybody can come with nothing on a lot and say, we really want to get started. We don't want to lose a month and a half. We'll figure it out and we'll take the risk, and we'll make sure that it complies to move forward. So it has to be something. It has to mean something. And I appreciate that they've come forward, and I'm, like you said, I'm not sure if maybe the person who drew this up was missing the applicable requirements here, but for me personally, it's not close enough. There's still too much of a gap between what we're seeing and what it needs to be. If it were closer, I would say yes, but I think there's just too much missing. But I do think that it's something that they could work with staff and likely bring it back to us at our next meeting and resolve it in various ways. Any other discussion on this one?
No.
Okay, Chair will entertain a motion. Well, I'm going to recommend that we table. I'll move that we table the matter to allow the applicant to review the development matters addressed by staff in this report, as we've discussed tonight, and to make any necessary changes or additions for reasons A in the staff report.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate?
Yeah, just one more try. You know, it might be my last meeting, so I'm going to go out having fun. Might not be, though, because Isaac's out of here, and we might have to. I agree. There's a lot missing. I feel like this was the better place to debate it during the motion. But there is a lot of stuff there. Like Corey said, we know the general layout. We know parking's going to be out. It's almost like you just got to take the scale tool and like that, right? It's a numbers game. It's not a layout game. The types of bushes, easy change. The 90% of that list Corey came up, I thought, was this is easy. This is exactly the feedback you give on conceptual. I agree. The landscaping and the parking were bigger, but I don't see the site changing that much. It's really just going to scale a little differently, maybe shift a little this way, and it's literally the building just going like this is all it is. So I agree that it's a woefully ill-prepared conceptual site plan, but because of the size of the site and the simplicity of the layout there, I think that they can go. I don't feel like we're being irresponsible or neglecting to give meaning to the conceptual site plan process. A lot of that is hitting the planning commission and having this feedback. You know, sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a planning commission for the applicant to get the gravity of the feedback. As aggressive as Corey is, the rubber hits the road sometimes at the planning commission. So I think that this is an important part of that process, and it's why I think the conceptual process is valuable. So I'd encourage us to vote against this motion, and if we do sink it, then I'll entertain a different type of motion. But that's all. Thank you.
Boy, you have been very persuasive to me tonight, because I mean, it's not an oddly footprinted building. You're right, it's a square.
Yeah, we're not dealing with a P like a 600 units or all kinds of stuff. But, yeah.
Can I ask the applicant a question? Do you already have someone for the office space?
Let's go ahead and invite the applicant
someone
to
selected.
step back
Because that's
to
where you're
the
getting killed on your
podium.
parking. Because it's five stalls per 1,000 square feet. So I mean, that's where you're getting killed on your parking. If you need a bigger building to reduce the office space, then you're pretty much there with parking. But I don't know if you can reduce office space.
One office space will be for the Cook Building Company, and the other warehouse will be for J&L Landscaping, and then we'll have a third one that we'll put out for leasing. But we do have 2 of the 3 units that are going to be occupied as soon as it's built.
Might end up being 2 units and not 3. But sorry, I bet Lisa loves this mid-motion.
Yeah, so, I mean, like I said before, those issues we've got to address. And, if the building gets smaller, it gets smaller. If the parking has to get bigger, it gets bigger. And we have to address those things. But I don't think we gave you a nothing report, and we have been talking to staff, so that made me feel a little bit bad. We've spent tens of thousands of dollars on engineering and design, and it may not be all the way there now, but we didn't give you a terrible conceptual thing. It's missed the mark for what reason, I don't know, and it needs to hit the mark, which we're willing to do. But I kind of felt like, honestly, that's what this process was, give us, we get the feedback, realize what we have to do, and then we can work with staff and come up, hitting all the points final. Still can't be approved. We're not going to come in with a fast food restaurant. It is going to stay, like the other gentleman was saying, I mean, it's going to be where it is. However big that is or however small that is, it's going to be there. And the parking, we have gas line easements all over the front of that property, which you're probably aware of, natural gas easements. And there's probably, 40 or 50 feet, Gary? Parking sits on top. And we can't move the parking. It is where it is. And the building is where it is, subject to size and parking and things like, landscaping and things like that. But to me, those are things we can address and work with staff on. And I don't know that we gain anything by just being tabled and put off, other than we just lose more time. We're not going to come in with anything different, because we'll have to work it out with staff before we come back here anyway. So I really don't want to see it tabled. I have no control over that, but it would help us to move forward, and it's going to change to meet requirements, but the integrity of the plan is not going to change.
Thank you very much. Well, we have a motion. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate on this? Not, we'll start with you, Commissioner Hunt. Motion is to table this. If the motion fails, then
I'm actually more on the lines with Logan on this one. So what do I, is it nay? Do I nay that? Yeah.
Can I skip ahead and vote so that we can
Nay.
have a more exciting
No.
finish?
nay.
Nay.
Yeah, I think Logan has persuaded me. Okay, motion fails.
But I just want to make it clear that if there's a motion on the table to approve this, it needs to be a very strong motion to pass. Thinking about that, just so that's clear.
Logan,
Yeah, I'm thinking about it.
you're out on, this is your lead here, my friend.
No, yeah, I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to approve the conceptual, what's that?
Technical word is accept.
Accept, thank you, to acknowledge, no, accept. The conceptual site plan for the Shorelands, I apologize, the Legacy Lands Investment Property in the Shorelands Commerce Park, subject to the reason, or let's see, the conditions are, number one, that the applicant come forward with a final site plan fully compliant with the zoning regulations in the Shorelands Commerce Park, with a particular attention to landscaping and parking regulations, particularly that parking regulations have a clear tabulated outline that has been reviewed by staff. In addition, a third item then would be that they comply with all items in this previous staff report to bring it up to compliance, including items with the landscaping, tree types and stuff like that. With the reason for the action, that it's consistent with that we did receive a lot of good information in, geez guys, this is really hacked up, that we did receive a conceptual site plan that addressed a lot of information, including the location of easements, the general layout of the property, the use, and that's all.
Would you entertain a friendly amendment?
Absolutely.
That a fourth condition, fourth condition?
Yeah.
Fourth condition was that the design incorporate the bold gestures
Yes.
into the building
Yeah.
design.
Yep. That we see bold gestures and that they discuss with staff prior to coming to the Planning Commission what that bold gesture might be.
Sure.
Number 5, particular attention to an entry feature as well.
Well, you can just look at all of the guidelines. I mean, there's
They was in there. Scratch 5.
There's like open space and critical lands, there's 2 guidelines, parking lot surfacing, there are 3 guidelines they need to follow. View shed protection, there's 2 guidelines. There's significant guidelines in the staff report.
Which was my number 3, is the staff report.
So there's quite a few guidelines that are not being met right now.
Great.
Lisa, do you feel like we have given enough here?
I don't know about the finding on that.
If we could just maybe get a second, and then if you'd like to amend the motion, that's the
Okay.
most efficient way to do it.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Now, is there an amendment?
I feel like the finding is a little vague.
Yeah, you're telling me.
And I'm trying to figure out if we can address that. I would say that the conceptual plan addresses the layout and design expectations of the SCP zone with a general view, but will need to be, but with additional work could sufficiently address it.
Yeah, I was going to suggest
Something like that.
that there has been sufficient information provided in the staff report to direct the applicant on how to comply with the
Yeah,
SCP standards.
I like that.
So I would amend my motion to have that as B on reasons for action, as Corey just stated. That's a motion to amend the original motion.
All right,
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion, debate? Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
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 Okay, so now B is, the new B is a part of our new
Reasons for action.
reasons for action. Okay, so now we have a fully moved and seconded motion on the table.
Good luck with that, Katie.
We all good with that? This is why you make the big bucks over there. You get to put that together. Let's Corey, will you make a note that we look really closely at that language when it comes back around
Yes.
for our review?
Yes.
Okay, moved and seconded. Commissioner Hunt, we'll start with you. The motion is to accept the conceptual site plan for
Okay.
all,
So aye.
based on findings and reasons that we articulated.
Yes, aye.
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 All right. Well, you are accepted. So I would encourage you to get together with staff and work with them.
That will be our next move.
You have a lot of work ahead of you. There's
Yeah.
a lot of things that need to be
Yeah,
addressed.
But
unfortunately, you'll be paying your engineer a little bit more to make some changes.
I don't want you to walk away feeling like you submitted, what was the word that somebody used, a deficient report? I mean, I don't want you guys feeling that badly about it. It was just that there was some
It just
things
missed the
that-
mark.
It just missed the mark.
I think he,
Yeah.
And like I say, I think a lot of kind of Corey's thinking coming into this was the fact that he and I didn't communicate on this.
Yeah.
When we communicated, I think things would have been a little different. And I was just, that's probably my fault. I was just thinking, yeah, I mean, usually when we come in for a preliminary, it's and you discuss all that, say, yeah, you need to go back and change all this stuff.
And I actually happened to be on vacation when they submitted
Oh,
to the
shoot.
DRC.
Well, communication is a good thing. Anyway, so congratulations. It's been accepted. Work with staff, and we'll see you back here for the final.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Enjoy your winter. I'm the only person who I get cold when winter starts, and I don't ever get warm again until spring. Item number 3 on our agenda, moving right along. We're very excited to talk about some zoning code amendments with regard to medical cannabis facilities. So I will turn the time over to our city attorney, Lisa.
Great, thank you. We have a proposed ordinance for you tonight dealing with medical cannabis. If you've been paying attention to the news, in 2018 and 19, the Utah legislature has adopted a number of bills and statutes that are approving medical cannabis in Utah. And so we have the Utah Medical Cannabis Act and the Cannabis Production Establishments Act and some other legislation that we are working through and trying to understand the impact on local jurisdictions. With many of these statutes, they have taken away some local control but they have set forth the locational standards and said these types of facilities have to be, can't be located within a certain distance of schools and parks and things like that, and then they can't be located within a certain distance of primarily residential zones. So there's very little for us to regulate. We don't regulate the licensing. They even preempt us on the signage for these types of facilities. But what we're trying to accomplish with this is the area that we can have some regulation is that the term primarily residential zone is not defined in the statutes. So the community locations of, the distance from community locations is defined as churches and schools and other things. But they made a location restriction from primarily residential zones. So essentially, the idea right now is that as a city, we can go in and help define what our primarily residential zones are. So I've worked with our GIS map person, Mike Smith, who has prepared some maps for us. I said, look, just take the state locational restrictions from any kind of, these community locations, and then also overlay. I gave him my list of zones. What I would like is just to kind of talk about, I'll go through the ordinance. We'll have a public hearing, but I'm actually recommending that we table this. This is just a first draft to try and get something, in the works. We are getting some calls. We've had a number of calls of people that want to, they've already looked at the locational restrictions and they want to know if, they can come to Centerville. the state will not be issuing that many licenses. This ordinance is just addressing two kinds of facilities. One is the cannabis production establishments, which actually include 3 or 4 different kinds of facilities, and then also the medical cannabis pharmacy. And they have different restrictions. That's why we have 2 different maps. But again, so the only thing we're trying to do is really define primarily residential zones. I've looked at, there's a couple other cities that have already adopted ordinances. So I looked at those, and they did have a few of these operational standards, but really were preempted by the statute from regulating much at all. So it, seems like a lot, but we're just trying to say, hey, here's our zones. And so if you look at all those locational, really the only place that either of these types of facilities could be located is along 1250 West on the west side, and then around to the south of Parish Lane as you come off the freeway, just south there in our commercial corridor, not to the north. So just by the Wendy's and I guess the Chevron, so not a lot of locations. So just kind of walking you through the ordinance, I put these 2 different kinds of facilities, and they're defined in state law, and I am in no way an expert on this yet. So if you want to ask me what these facilities actually are, I can read you the statute, but it's basically some are where they're going to produce this type of product, and the other ones where they're going to sell it. But they can't really put much signage, just a little bit, and they can advertise on their website and things like that. And I'm not even sure how the sales tax would work, if we had one of these in the city. Oh, but what I was going to say is, on some of these, the state is not going to issue that many licenses. I think it's for the production establishment, they're only going to issue 5 to 8 licenses, and on the other one, the pharmacies, 14 throughout the whole state. So, it could come to Centerville, but, I'm sure people are looking all over, and so there's this application process, and that's why we're getting the phone calls, because people want to apply for these 14 and 5 and 8 licenses. So I just set forth some definitions, which is basically the types of facilities. I initially was going to put these definitions in our definition section and then list these in our table of uses, but I specifically decided not to do that because I don't actually want to say these are permitted anywhere. I think that we just say, as Centerville City, we understand we have to comply with the law. We're just defining where we can, some locational restrictions, rather than saying permitted or not permitted. Just go to this. So that's why I'm not, it has its own definition section. So the primarily residential zones, I just went through and said, okay, I'm going to put in all the PDOs that I can think of and all of these. And I will say I thought of one other item, which is the Shoreland Commerce Park Mixed Node Zone, because I think that one allows residential. So I'm actually asking this group to help me think about what are our residential zones that are not just RL, RM, RH. So I did the Florentine Villas Special District, and then I did say any residential or mixed use PDO or PUD, including but not limited to. So if we think of another one, or we'll obviously be approving more of these. So hopefully the way I've drafted that, we could add some, but I think we should also add that Shoreline Commerce Park Mixed Node Zone. And then since drafting this, I have gone through more of the bills, because they're pretty lengthy bills and statutes, and I'm not sure if we can just say blanket that our agricultural low zone is primarily residential. There's a provision on the I think it's the cannabis production establishment that actually says, look, it's going to be a permitted use in any of your industrial zones and any of your ag zones unless you define something else. So I need to research that a little bit further to see if we can really just exclude all of our agricultural low. I think it definitely makes sense on the east side because our ag low is basically a holding area for residential
Yeah.
and/or it is residential.
Yeah.
But if you look at the west side, all of that on the west side is agricultural. And so it would open up the entire west side. So I'd like to do a little bit more research on the statutory language because it's not clear. I think it needs a little bit more research. But essentially, so then I just spell these out that we're going to have some standards for each type of facility, each type of establishment. And these, again, these 4 items just came from some other cities that have started, allowing these. And then we have the locational restrictions. And I also thought as I was rereading this today that I would like to take community location and just add that to our definitions section. I kind of had it hidden in each of these, but let's just define community location in the definitions and take it out of here.
Lisa, is community location specifically defined under state law?
Yes.
And if so, can we cross-reference that to the code section, just so there's no confusion about what it is defined as?
Yes, okay, so put a reference to state law. Yes, so I'll do that same thing. I'll add it to the definitions, and then you'll see what I did. So you want me to do exactly what I did here, as such term is more particularly defined in?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I read the as defined by state law, and I thought, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So it's just, it would
Okay.
be easier. Does
Yes.
the state law restrict, so you said that they don't define what constitutes primarily residential zone, but does it set it can't be located within 600 feet of a primarily residential zone? Is that,
Yes,
that's
that's correct. So that is the
That's a
statutory
state law.
restriction, but then they left it
Okay.
up to the communities to define primarily residential, or to just argue later. And that's where I'm thinking, I'm not sure I want to argue later. I'd rather put it in our code where I think we're going to be given some deference than just argue later.
But we can't expand the 600 feet. We can't say
No.
within 1,000 feet. We could go shorter, not that I'm advocating for
Right,
it, but we can't
except,
go bigger.
yes, so on the community locations, or for the cannabis production establishment, it's 1,000 feet from any community location and 600 feet from a primarily residential zone. And then on the medical cannabis pharmacy, it's actually 200 feet. I put 1,000, the maps are right. But it's 200 feet from a community location and 600 feet from a primarily residential. But if you look at the map, it doesn't change it that much. Because the 600 feet from the zones is more impactful than from the community location. So you'll see the maps look very similar, other than around Parish Lane. That's the only, well, a little bit. They're a little different, but not that
Is that the different facility
So I've been debating as well whether to have these maps, because I need to draft this ordinance in such a way that says, look, this map is not the end-all, because a new school might go in, or a new residential zone. We're going to be rezoning it, and so the other cities that I looked at, they didn't actually have a map. So, we
nice.
may want to take the map out and just say, hey, we'll make the map available. But I thought it was helpful because
Yeah.
people are going to look at that map and say, oh, yikes, there's not that many places. But
Couple comments on some of those zones, Lisa. Do we or should we protect, not that, I mean, I'm not huge against medical cannabis. I don't smoke, Thomas, just so you know, but should we protect against the West Bountiful neighbors? I noticed on our south end that technically down there, that the industrial park, it's right up next to West Bountiful neighbors. Does that impact where we would put a buffer? Or do we not have the ability to consider the fact that West Bountiful has primarily residential use there?
Yeah, we don't care about them.
Well, Thomas grew up there, yes.
Well, they would be prohibited under the statute.
That was a joke for the record.
But it is interesting from a jurisdictional, do we have the jurisdiction to say on our map? I mean, I'm only hesitant because we wouldn't know or keep up on any rezone or something, but that is a good point that I'll think about. But they would be prohibited anyway, whether it's on
I
our
see.
map or not.
Yeah.
If it's a residential zone, yeah.
Isn't the onus on West Bountiful though, then, to get in and define what constitutes a primarily residential zone? If they want to protect that area to the south, it seems like it's incumbent on them then to say, our housing along the north end of our border is a primarily residential zone.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question though, because the area for the facility is within Centerville. So they could define it, but Centerville probably should too.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I wondered if for informational purposes, you could just write down there on the map, like, this is a primarily residential zone as of this date.
For Bountiful,
In
yeah.
West Bountiful, you know, or maybe we just block it out because the map isn't like required and it's more a utility thing anyway. But the other one was, I think with the Main Street, we were talking about having maybe residential units there. Kevin, I know, was really pushing for that. And so if that happened, it doesn't really matter actually because we're there. And then on the agricultural zones, just one thought. I thought if they're smaller than an acre, it seems like they're primarily residentially used. But if they're larger than an acre, it seems as though it's probably not primarily residentially used. So if you were going to
Maybe
define
an acre or lower.
yeah, 1 acre or less.
Yeah.
But once you get above an acre, it seems like, so that could be a tool you could use to define that.
Well, I like that idea, although I would look to see, because I think it's the east-west distinction. The land on the west really probably is truly agricultural, whereas the land on the east, but you may have a larger parcel, like a 2
That's
acre or a
true.
3 acre, but that has one house on it.
Yeah.
That's been kind of waiting to develop, so.
So maybe that's something
If
you
the-
can
oh,
use
maybe
on the
like
west.
If there's
Yeah.
if there's a dwelling unit on the parcel or something,
Right.
I don't know. Anyway, something to consider, Lisa.
Yeah, that's great input.
Do we want to then, with regard to the West Bountiful line, if we're gonna be putting something on the map, do we want to do the same with regard to our Farmington friends to the north?
Well, that's what I put as double, I could even just put something that says, hey, if there's a primarily residential zone in an adjacent neighborhood, it will, or adjacent city, it will also be applicable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would cover
Because it is covered by state. So I was looking for, okay, I'll just read you this language. So, and this is the same language, whether it's an industrial zone or an agricultural zone, but it says, if a municipality's zoning ordinance provides for an agricultural zone, the operation of a cannabis production establishment shall be a permitted agricultural use in any agricultural zone unless the municipality has designated by ordinance before an individual submits a land use application for a cannabis production establishment. That's why we're going through this process, so we can get ahead of the game. At least one agricultural zone in which the operation of a cannabis production establishment is a permitted use.
Oh.
So we have
So
to
I don't know if
choose
they
one
mean, if we
spot.
have, let's say we have more than one ag zone. Let's say we have an ag low and an ag medium. One way you could read this is that if we provide for an ag zone, well, it should say if we provide for agricultural zones, then we have to at least allow it in one of them. But
Well,
it says if we,
Lisa, just to think about a suggestion, and I don't know if it'll work, but agricultural low, when you read the definition, is devoted to single family with integration of agricultural uses. Agricultural medium is a production zone. We don't have any right now in Centerville, it's all AL. But we do have in the zoning ordinance, Ag M.
oh, so we have the designation, we just don't have any land. Oh, so when I looked at the zoning map,
You're not gonna see
I
that other
didn't see,
designation.
okay, so we could say AM,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Because that would be, in my view,
But I don't know how you read that. I don't know what they mean, but I need to.
but I'm just saying,
That seems-
ag medium would be intended for something like that.
Yeah, that's what it would be intended for, if you think about it.
This is where you have egg production and packaging. And
That can't be, otherwise you could just pass an agricultural weed zone and then just say, but we're not gonna designate any of our land as agricultural weed zone. And,
well,
right, and then you would get around the law. That can't be what they were intending.
may not be what they intended, but
Yeah, I don't know. That's an
Maybe what's
interesting
written.
question. If, I think that if you read it, Lisa, though, to say that we can do that, I mean, it's not like, we're not circumventing it in as much as we already have an agricultural medium on the books.
Right.
And it has
Right,
historically been before, and maybe.
because by definition, the Ag L is a single-family zone.
But that just, it
Yeah.
seems.
It just says, if we provide for an agricultural zone in the singular, then this kind of establishment shall be a permitted use in that zone, unless by ordinance, we designate at least one ag zone in which it would be permitted. So, yeah, that's what we have to work with. So that's why I'm saying I think we still need to do some research, but I definitely just wanted to get something on the books and actually get some feedback. So I think this has been very helpful. So we have noticed it as a public hearing, so I would recommend that you hold the public hearing on this and then, you know, direct staff to make any other changes, and we'll bring it back at some point after we've done more research.
This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so I'll take the opportunity to open a public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes forward. Seeing no one else here, we'll close the public hearing. What about for residential or mixed-use PDO? Is Centerville Commons a PDO? Centerville Commons? Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, there,
They are, right?
No, they're residential medium zone.
but they're a PDO.
Are they a PDO? No,
It
okay.
was built before the PDO ordinance.
Really?
What about the new Brighton Homes that's going in across the street from J.A.
Yes,
Taylor?
that's a PDO.
That is.
Whatever that's called, I would add that to your list.
Oh,
Sheffield
Sheffield
Downs.
Downs.
Oh, it's
Oh,
already
no,
there.
no,
Is it called
Hafoka,
Sheffield Downs?
what was it? No, the.
The Hafoka property?
What was that one called?
Thomas's.
No, that's Porter Walton.
Porter
Porter
Walton.
Walton?
Is that a
On-
PDO?
No, it's a residential
No.
medium zone.
RM.
Okay, so it does not need to.
What
be.
about, did you do the one down northwest of the city?
Woods Park,
Woods Park.
it's on the map.
Is it where?
Okay.
So technically, PUDs do not need to be on here because they have an underlying zone, and it's just a tool for platting or development. But sometimes if it was a PUD that, like in a mixed use, that's why I added it, was just as a catch-all of if there happened to be one. But PDOs definitely need to be on here because they are a different zone.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
That is so, I really want to know what you think that the answer is to whether you have to actually have an agricultural piece of land that is zoned that way, or whether you can just theoretically have an agricultural zoning, but not
Well, I don't-
actually
yeah.
zone anything that way.
I don't think it's gonna be clear, but arguably, if we had an area in the city where our general plan said, hey, this is suggested to be agricultural medium, and somebody could rezone property to that, you know,
Yeah.
it might be available, but if our general plan doesn't even anticipate it, and there's no way you could ever have agricultural medium, I agree with you that that's not within the spirit of the law of allowing for it.
Well, but it also makes me wonder, now my lawyer brain is going, as to whether you could create I jokingly call it an agricultural weed zone, and then rezone a quarter of an acre in
Right by
a
the
sounds
police station.
small right next to the police station in your city and say, and that's it. I don't know, it's an interesting intellectual question.
Right, or you define these areas on the east side as, you know, agricultural, low residential, or, yeah, you know, just rezone all of those into some other, and then you'd have your agricultural low, but.
Yeah. Interesting. I move that we do we need an actual motion on this?
Yes.
I move that we table this to allow staff to go back and incorporate our comments.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
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 All right. Did you get what you needed, Lisa?
Yes, that was helpful, thank you.
Next up, continuing on in our wonderful world of subdivision ordinance updates, we're looking at chapter 20. I'll turn the time back over to Lisa.
Thank you. So I skipped ahead to the end of the subdivision ordinance because We're almost done, well, we're done with all of the chapters that the consultant has drafted. And then there's a few more that we decided we wanted to divide and actually have a whole chapter just on PUEs and a whole chapter just on street vacations. So I actually have to go back and draft those, so that might take a bit. But so the next one we have is the last chapter in the draft, which is on enforcement, chapter 20. And this chapter significantly mirrors what we have in our zoning code. So, you know, when we already had a good process, we've used it in the subdivision ordinance. Just going through, you know, all of our chapters have a purpose section, the scope, and the definition. So all of that is the same. And just highlighting here that the designated enforcement authority is the zoning administrator, but we can have delegated enforcement officials. But we don't have a lot of enforcement on subdivisions. It's not like zoning. It's not like our municipal code. So I can't even think when we were enforcing the subdivision ordinance, other than, you know, making sure that the plats are complying. But so we just kind of go through types of violations, and again, it's very similar to any kind of violation of our zoning code, and what the remedies might be. So this one was a little different. So for instance, if, you know, if a plat didn't meet it, we could void the plat, or the transfer of land can be deemed voidable. Those are new for the subdivision, not necessarily in our zoning code. And then by state law, any violation of zoning and subdivision is just a Class C misdemeanor. We can't go any higher than that. So you'll see that in the penalty section. In our old ordinance, we probably still had the Class B misdemeanor, because we used to just say any kind of code violation is Class B. And then on page 3, I just want you to know I significantly reduced this because we actually copied everything from the zoning to here, but I decided since we already had it in the zoning code, we're just going to refer to the zoning code for our complaint procedures, for our enforcement procedures, for our civil penalty procedures, and for our criminal penalty procedures. Sometimes I like, you know, just having it so you don't have to look somewhere else, but it was so lengthy, and I didn't want to have to keep both up to date, you know, like if we fixed one time frame. So I just, that eliminated about 5 pages of this chapter. So I was excited about that. And then, I
think that was the right call.
Got then the other enforcement matters and appeals. Since the subdivision, so I think our subdivision ordinance, the history, you know, we have our zoning code, and then, you know, but some cities have a land use and development, and they have their zoning code and their subdivision ordinance all in one. I think historically, subdivision wasn't necessarily a land use issue, and so we were trying to avoid some public noticing requirements, but the statutes now make it clear that subdivision and zoning are both land use, and you have to follow all the noticing. So that's just kind of why I think historically our subdivision ordinance was somewhere else, but I don't mind it because I think the zoning code is already long as it is, and subdivision, while it's part of that, it would make the zoning code really long. So anyway, that's why we have a separate title for subdivisions. But I'm getting kind of excited to be close to the end of this project, but also, you know, there's still quite a bit of work to be done.
I have one comment and one question.
Yep.
So on the second page, right above the penalty provision, that sub-paragraph K just looks like it's missing a space. Like the justification there is missing.
Let's see. Okay, at penalties,
See penalty 15.
above
21.
A or below?
Right above it, K. So
On K.
On K.
Oh, I see, the tab,
It's
yes.
just a tab thing. That was, you may have,
Okay.
it may fix it when you finish formatting. So here's my question on penalty, and this is just an academic question, and we do not have to spend any significant degree of time on it whatsoever. But is it a Class C misdemeanor upon conviction or civil penalty, or can it be and or? And who has the discretion to decide whether it's a Class C misdemeanor or a civil penalty?
Yeah, this is actually a really interesting legal question. And I read the statute that we're going to do either or. Because once you go down, now, there's plenty of options though, because every day is a different violation. So typically what we do is we are just going, because it has been challenged, you have to pick one or the other. So what we'll do is we'll go the civil, because it's the, we don't want to start filing criminal citations against people. So we just want them to comply. So we'll do the civil penalty and they can have that appeal. But if they're still in violation, we can go ahead the next day and issue and say, okay, now we're going to the next step. And for today's violation, we're pursuing a criminal action. And that's kind of what we've done.
And that's the city attorney's discretion?
Or the prosecutor.
Got it.
Typically, it's a combination of community development, city attorney's office. That's usually where the civil penalty starts. And then once we're not getting any compliance, which is about 2% of the violations, then, we'll bring either the police or the prosecutor in.
Thank you for entertaining my academic question. Did you get all the feedback that you needed from us? I don't know that we had really any feedback for you on this one.
Yeah, I think this one's pretty standard because we already have a chapter in the zoning code, so we didn't change a lot in this one.
Thank you for all of your hard work on that.
Yeah.
Moving right along, item number 5 on our agenda is the 2020 Planning Commission meeting schedule. I am going to object to attending January 222nd.
I know, I was gonna say that.
But that's okay.
I have a few glaring errors when I drafted this a month ago and didn't look at it.
2019.
They're all 2019.
Yeah,
So-
we get that that's supposed to be 2020.
There are some edits to be made. But just, we have to, per state code, since we meet regularly, we need to post an annual calendar of our meetings. So they can always be rescheduled later as things come up. But we do need to create one calendar. So besides changing January 222nd and all the 2019s.
Wouldn't you want to put November 10th with the asterisk?
Yes, that was
Okay.
my second item. So
Great.
in the asterisk, it says we'll meet on November 10th, which should be what is in the calendar listing.
Yeah.
So I will make those changes. But if there are other changes to the scheduling, all the January 8th is the correct date, January 22nd is the correct date, just not the years.
So June 24th is Pioneer Day, and I'm assuming
July 24th.
Ah ha ha! Oh my gosh, I saw the 24th on there. I was like, nope, that's wrong. We can't do it on that day. You are absolutely right, July.
So
Okay.
July 22nd is close, but
We're
the
good.
holiday is the Friday. So
That's what you get when you're like looking really quickly through a calendar. Yeah, it's all
You're
good. I've only lived there for how many years?
Can you email all of us or the corrected one?
Yeah, that would be great.
I can do that. I'll also post it. It has to be posted in many places.
If you put in your Outlook calendar, I found this, and you tell it to make it on the 2nd and 4th of
Yeah,
every
you can
month,
do that
like
one.
it goes out in perpetuity, man. I never even have to worry about it anymore. It's just on my calendar.
Yep.
Thank you, the magic of Outlook.
And iCal, same thing.
Cool. Okay. Item number 6, Community Development Director's Report and City Council Report. Corey?
Well, exciting news for you. You don't have to come to a second meeting in December.
Yay!
Yay. So there's another enjoyable winter moment.
Looking for all the happiness that we can
Yes, we
that we
do.
can achieve, Corey.
So January 8th should be the date, right? Did I
Yes.
get that right off the calendar? So enjoy your holiday season. The city council report, just an update, the amendment, nicknamed cargo trailers, was adopted for the salmon area. So the SCP for now has the equipment sales and rental as a conditional use. The DeVore property was tabled and it's scheduled for next Tuesday.
Where is that one? Was that last?
Yeah, that was your last one. That's the end of 400
Yeah.
West, north end of 400
Did they
West.
table it with the idea that they like to hear public comment and make a decision at a later meeting?
Yes,
Is that
that's
kind of the rationale?
generally their,
Yeah, that was their motion.
that's generally, there was a significant crowd again for them, just like here, and a lot of the same issues were brought up, and so they typically will table it just to
Digest.
go through the information. Tonight, there was a little cottage meeting with one of the council members with the neighborhoods in the area, so you can see that being prepared for next week. And then the interesting one for you, the RDA, the Iggy site, the Iggy building, they approved a reuse of that site for a bank, for Bank America. And so it
Really?
will,
Why is the RDA involved?
and that's a parcel in the RDA area. Also, the RDA maintained some input on uses and design when they sold the property. So any changes have to go to the RDA. So you'll potentially see, they're locating, from what I understand, 10 branches throughout Utah. This is a selected site. This seems to be a fairly serious consideration of this site, but I don't know when we'll see a conceptual site plan to see all the changes that
Seems
take
like that's
place.
going to be an overparked area, though. Going from a restaurant where you're going to have a lot of parking to a bank, hopefully as they think about that, they'll maybe think about putting in some more green space.
It'll be interesting what they come up. I know they submitted a traffic study, right? As I recall, they submitted a traffic study for the bank. I had conversations with them a few months back and raised the issue of circulation and traffic, so.
Banks use an awkwardly large amount of land because of their drive-throughs.
Oh,
So
good
it's-
point.
So it'll be interesting what they do, but it did, the RDA did approve the opportunity for that bank to come, so we'll see what happens. And that's my report.
Great.
Thank you very much. Last item on the agenda, our committee meeting minutes from November 13th. Let's do this as we normally do, page by page. Let me know if you have any changes. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7. Chair will entertain a motion.
Chair, I move that we amend, or adopt the minutes.
As
As-
unamended.
Thank you, from November 13th. Thanks. It's my
I
motion.
second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
I
Any opposed? All right. And I move that we adjourn for 2019 to
Second.
reassemble in
Second.
2020.
Fourth. Second.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, guys.